Hello, I am Sienna Rouse, and I want to welcome you to this event of the Southern Festival of Books. Yet again online, but staying safe and being protected. And fortunately, we have incredible authors who are good live or online, and whose work just speaks however they're, whatever platform they're working on. So before I introduce you to these authors, though, I do want to, of course, just welcome you on behalf of Humanities Tennessee, who does so much for our state in making sure that the humanities are lifted. And I can think of so many aspects of my life that are better because of what Humanities Tennessee has offered. And especially the Southern Festival of Books. So if you were watching on Facebook Live or YouTube and you want to ask questions during this time, you're free to ask questions, and we will try to get them to the authors throughout our time together, or at least towards the end of our time. So please, Adrian told me he'd answer anything you ask. No, kidding. But we will try to get to those questions, and whatever the authors feel appropriately uh, is appropriate to answer, they will answer. So Parnassus is the bookseller for Southern Festival of Books, and your purchases of a book via Parnassus will help keep the festival free. And it's been a wonderful festival that's been free for many years. So Humanities Tennessee asks that you support these authors and support Parnassus and their books. And you can also support through the app by visiting the website humanitiestennessee.org. It's humtn.org. All right, so let us talk about the authors that you will spend time with today. Hopefully, we definitely have with us Adrian Matejka. Hello, Adrian. Adrian is in Indianapolis, Indiana, but teaches at University of Indiana at Bloomington. And so was just telling me about his long commute where he has podcasts and French lessons happening every day as he approaches his students, who are lucky students because they get to learn from an author whose work I've gotten to spend a lot of time with, and that I try to teach whenever I'm working with students as well. He's the author of The Devil's Garden, which was published by Alice James and Alice James Books in 2003, and it won the New York New England Award. And Mixology, published by Penguin, which was a winner of the 2008 National Poetry Series. His third collection of poems, The Big Smoke, was also published by Penguin in 2013. And it's incredible. The story of Jack Johnson and what Adrian does with the language there is incredible. Jack Johnson is a Black heavyweight champion of the world, and just many great conversations happening in The Big Smoke. It was awarded the 2014 Anisfield Wolf Book Award and was a finalist for the 2013 National Book Award. Adrian is heavily awarded, heavily lauded, and his fourth collection, Map to the Stars, was published by Penguin again in 2017. He has a book that's just come out yet again with Penguin called Somebody Else Sold the World. And it just released fairly recently. And so congratulations on that. And then Adrian's also a part of what I call family, the Third Man family. My chapbook was published there, and Adrian just released a mixed media collection inspired by the Funkadelic, Standing on the Verge and Maggot Brain through Third Man Books. So you had a big year, and you have another book coming up, I believe, in 2022. So I'll go ahead and introduce Major Jackson. Hopefully Major will be able to join us unless something has happened, but I'll go ahead and do an introduction. Even if Major doesn't get to join us, spend time with Major's work. It's important. Major Jackson is the author of 5 books of poetry, including The Absurd Man, Roll Deep, Holding Company, Hoops, and Living Saturn, which won the Cave Canem Poetry Prize for First Book of Poems in 2002. He edited volumes including Best American Poetry 2019, Renga for Obama, and Library of America's County Cullen Collected Poems. a recipient of fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Guggenheim Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Major Jackson has been awarded a Pushcart Prize, Whiting Writers Award, and has been honored by the Pew Fellowship in the Arts and the Witter Bynner Foundation in conjunction with the Library of Congress. Again, heavily rewarded, heavily lauded. His poems are found in many major publications, including American Poetry Review, The New Yorker, Plowshares, and Major is now a part of the Nashville family, living here in Nashville as the Gertrude Conway Vanderbilt Chair in the Humanities at Vanderbilt University. He also serves as poetry editor of the Harvard Review. So we'll kick off. Adrian, you'll share some work, and then we'll get started on a conversation.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that, Sienna. I'm going to switch so I can stand up. We've talked earlier about this. I can't read sitting down. So I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm excited to get to talk with Major if he's able to join us. So I'm just going to ride for a little bit and read, and then we'll jump from there. Okay. Let me switch my cameras up. Yeah, I'm old and creaky if I stay sitting in this chair for too long.
I love this fancy camera switch.
You know what I mean? It's like we've been doing this for so long now. I had to come back with just a home studio at this point. First of all, though, I need to say thank you so much to the Southern Festival of the Book and to Tennessee Humanities for supporting this. And thanks to all of you for listening. So maybe I'll read a few poems from Somebody Else Sold the World, and then read a few poems from the Maggot Brain side of the Funkadelic book, and then we'll see where we're at in terms of time and everything else. Somebody Else Sold the World. Oh, let me tell you. So here's the book. The cover is by this brilliant artist, Dario Robleto, and the title is a riff on one of David Bowie's songs, The Man Who Sold the World. Somebody else sold the world, and before I knew it, the violet sky flagged with the sun's violent demands for magnolias in bloom, for natural light, any place magnanimous without locks or doors, different kinds of mass for being and breathing. The antagonists with their vanity tans and usual mischiefs whistled jingles about liberties and war as we buttoned up in our confinement and we dreamed about hugging. We talked about was and when we missed our friends and dentist appointments. Molars dropped out without breathable air. Hair forgot its natural colors without testimonies at intersections and barbecues. Words lost their family recipes. Friends lost their words, then lost their parents. A mass few found love somehow in the gerrymandered grocery lines and farmers' fields upturned with unsellable vegetables. So the antagonists cornered the curfews, manufacturing arguments, guns at the ready like henchmen. The air around us was so right, it might have broken in half if we could touch it. So this whole book, except for like maybe 3 poems or 4, was written between March 2020 and October 2020. And so there are a lot of poems about the pandemic. There are a lot of poems about what I was calling the antagonists. And when I was thinking about that word, I love it so much. I was thinking about the Trump administration and his lackeys. I was thinking about my neighbors who didn't necessarily want to support each other. I was thinking about the people fighting over toilet paper. I was thinking about me when I wasn't doing as much as I could. Anybody who was in opposition to the true sense of humanity. Somebody else sold the world. It's got an epigraph from Ben O'Cree. Hunger is an antagonist. Outside, the antagonists are wet with flag colors and sycophancy, and I'm alone in the front room again like it's 1982 again, when the power got cut off and the neighbors brawled like sullen countries over the demarcation of kitchen table and china hutch. Another revolution breaking in half, another slim-ringed alliance snapped under the weight of lost referendums. Where did all their log stem love go? Even now, I'm sitting in the window seat in the year of cottonmouth and dissatisfaction as white people goose-step masklessly and the antagonists imagine new ways to dismantle poor people. Sitting, running, dreaming, coughing, seeming, cuffs for all of them. Bullets, too, glinting in perpetual velocity. To be poor is to always be blamed for your already busted happenstance. And there's no change in that American tradition now, not even during a pandemic. Meanwhile, the antagonists boat out to their islands of isolation and repose. Anything they need is essential, while the rest of us, we stay in place like furniture. Maybe I'll read two more from this and then switch. I thought when I was writing this book, I thought I was writing a book of love poems originally. And so the idea of love got interrupted pretty immediately by being in, COVID quarantine and isolation. I was one of the people who got COVID between vaccination shots. It's like a whole scene. So maybe I'll read something about that. You'll know, and maybe some of you have experienced this, when you're with somebody and there's a point you come to where it's time to maybe tell them, hey, I love you. And that moment, only two things can happen. Either they say, I love you too, and everybody's happy, or they, excuse themselves politely and try to get out of that situation. This is a poem where somebody tried to excuse themselves politely. I say this thing for the first time, and what comes next? Charcoal underbone, some dark room for soliloquies, and irises wide at home, some other glitter party popping off and ending up with me, counting resignations on the couch made out of my last pennies. Coffer profiles lost in the cushions, dull with emancipation and worth almost me. Button nicks instead of eyes, green patina instead of skin over presidential profiles. How to separate the awkward exhales from full-bodied anxieties. The song in the park across the street bumps something about love and sunflowers, but I can't split my requiem from its simple leather. Sneakers arrhythmically skeletal, squeaking left then right in somebody else's garden. Midtown in a crack city split by a river cluttered with so much rough history, it's eye level to the flustered blackbirds. All right. I know I said I was only going to read one more from this book, but I keep saying things that I want to share with you. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so selfish about it. One of the things that I came away from the pandemic with was how easy it is for people to make excuses about their behavior and about how whatever they needed to do to justify how they were feeling about themselves. So this iteration of Somebody Else Sold the World is about excuses. And it's got a reference to T.S. Eliot in the middle of it. It's got a reference to David Bowie. It's got a reference to a lot of things. Somebody else sold the world. I don't know if I should excuses. It's a really good deal excuses. It's not mine even if I could excuses. If I don't do it, someone else would excuses. If I don't play along, I'll be excuses. I'm committed to it now. See, excuses. Oh no, not me. Excuses. Excuse me. I'll get back to you next Tuesday. Let us go, you and I, excuses. Excuse me because I loved you too much. Excuse me because I swerved too much. Well, what had happened after it was excuses. Well, I planned to catch a bus after it, excuses. It was dark and he was dark, recuse me. There was no one to help me, excuses. I was worried about my safety, excuses. What about me, excuses? Excuse me, what about me? Yeah. Nothing like a global pandemic to bring capitalism and selfishness right up to the front. I'm just going to read one more poem from this book for real this time, and I think it's a little gentler than that. I had, in 2019, my father, Robert Matejka, died, and also my mentor, John Tribble, died, and they died within about a month apart. They were about a month apart in their deaths, and, as you can imagine, that was rough. Right around that same time, I was at Emily Dickinson's house. I just realized when I said it sounds like I'm talking about one of my buddies. I was reading in the Emily Dickinson house, and they let me spend an hour in her room writing. And I'm a huge fan of Emily Dickinson, so I wrote this poem in Emily Dickinson's bedroom about my dad and about John. It's called "It's All I Have, Daydreaming." I once got so high I couldn't remember if I loved me as much as I loved you. My mezzanine thin dream, my slip-streamed wish list, my knees wobble like the octaves above the sun clocks when you look at me, and the bees, phosphine swirling at 5 o'clock every day. I once got so hyped, the buzzing sounds cleared out my ears while previous Christmases piled into questions. They reopened infatuations as almost reality. They broke my reservoir of debt eventually. In a damage, even imaginary oceans need imagined plankton, and so I ended up out in the boathouse of quotations. Sometimes bees seem sentimental as they fan the air with things I don't like talking about. My old life, Pops, John. What else could I do after letting go other than hum at the water? All this loss, mystifying as hydrology. None of it relieves my dreams of the three of us in Seattle by the glittering lake. It's backdropped by mountains as the water recedes. The turtles here submerge when geometrically convenient. Fish, too, finning in temporary currents. All of us backstroking, so there's only sky to see clearly in the soak. Yeah. I really appreciate that they let me do that. That they let me stay in her space just briefly and work it. Do I have time to read a couple of the poems from this or no? I can just do whatever.
Yeah, go for it. You've got some time.
I got time. Okay. Because originally I was supposed to read like 3 poems and then we were going to talk, right?
Yeah. Well, we'll have time to talk. So good.
Hey, so this is now all of a sudden this has turned into a show I didn't expect. All right. So this is the book. I'm going to see if you can see this. It's light, a little crazy. This is the maggot brain side of things. And then you flip it over and there's the somebody else or the standing on the verge side, right? So there's 2 books. Each side is different. Each has got a different thing in it. I'm going to just read from the maggot brain part of things today. It's based on Eddie Hazel's the album, Funkadelic's album that features the maggot brain song that has this insane solo from Eddie Hazel. And so each of the pages, some of the pages have art on them, right? And the art is amazing. This is from Nicholas Galinnen, who's a indigenous sculptor, musician, artist, just a brilliant dude always around. He's got a band on Sub Pop called Yata Sing. So check out Nicholas's work too. I'm going to read a couple of the sections of this poem and then we'll see where we're at. All right. So this is Maggot Brain, based on the Eddie Hazel solo in that song. Ain't you supposed to be discreet inside this sorry song like notes made out of teeth? Ain't you supposed to skip the wet alley of heartbeats? As many questions as beliefs before the needle and the need. And the brain pan light fixtures are vacant like they always are in abandoned houses. Flip of empty switch notes conscripted and amalgamating, and somebody out here is hoping for a place to glitch. They throw protest bricks made from sound into your amp stack anatomy. They giggle as speaker and preamp tumble intimately. Maggot brain, fold packets crumble the same way. Bend of fingers, bend of brain, arcing in the spent lighter light. The knuckles rising behind that twitchy brick are a silhouette of mountainness. Left loves, lost love picks, dropped afro picks, and the dash to a cop and then from a cop. His nightstick slapping his hip with each broken leap. Big-chested, precipitous escapes down gorge sides as loose rocks follow your scramble through rivers and glens where animals barely pause while you sprint by in a leather jumpsuit, feathers still in your brim. The natural haze of escape instead of being here on the nod, hanging onto the guitar neck while the floor drops from beneath your alligator boot knobs. Some alligators have whole mouths full of sharp teeth, just like a Saturday, and end up as shoes. Sometimes necklaces, too, swinging hungry the way metronomes do. All right, so this here is the picture that's on it. I know this isn't the best way to observe this art. And then the next page, this is the art that's connected to that thing. So you can see that. So it's like I don't know, it's a art and poetry conversation. It's based on Eddie Hazel. So for those of you that don't know who he is, I realize I maybe should have mentioned some things about him. He was the guitar player for Funkadelic for a long time, but he was an addict and he would just disappear for long stretches. So he wasn't in the band anymore. He died in 1992, broke and out on the streets. And so, all right. I'll read another one of these. Actually, it's just the next one. So let me show you the art again.
Oh, great.
Yes, you can see. All right. And then I'll sit back down. Let's talk about the metronome of loss. I once had hungry chatter before it got unsustainable. I once beat everything around me down like an unrelatable heart. Once I started at the skull-browned edge before it got unreliable and bland. I once had a red hammer in hand and played it in the freight car of my singing emancipation. I once had two guitars from a pawn shop instead of feet, and I still couldn't swing. A woman so fine I quit eating meat of any kind. I once had 16th notes where some other people have gears, an altruistic Jones for touch despite my half veneers, so much I didn't matter as much. I once had a heart but sold it for sauce. I once had some semi-gloss gators but lost them in the static. Really, I had a double cross and a 6-string Cadillac status. I lost both beauties in the alley traffic. Really, I had someone who loved my interludes and strings together. Imagine anybody willing to love this busted up, wild-pedaled endeavor. So it goes on like that. I hope you'll take a look at it. It's really it was really a wonderful thing to write about Funkadelic, and particularly about Eddie Hazel.
I love that it's kind of multiply ekphrastic, because you're working with the art and then working with, of course, Funkadelic art and art, you know, through music, and which is art.
Yeah, it was really wild to so the maybe I should have thought about showing it down here instead of up there, because it's a little bit easier to see. But the artists are both musicians too, and so they're both musicians. Like I said, Nicholas is in a band called Yat to Sing, and then Kevin Nyrider, who does the other art, is like this multi-instrumentalist who lives in Seattle making music and painting. And so to work with the two of them through our shared enthusiasm for Funkadelic, but also because it is ekphrasis, like it's ekphrastic about another level of ekphrasis, right?
Yeah.
So many possibilities. And we barely got started on it. You know, we could have kept working on this for a while. We just, didn't want it to sprawl.
I love it. I love that it's also shaped a little bit like an EP, or an album.
Yeah. Well, that was Chet. That was Chet YZ.
Yeah. Third Man's fun to work with in that way, to create something creative.
Yeah. They were willing to be open about that. And in fact, we had this idea originally that it was going to be like a tear out book where you could take out the art so people could do something with it. But that was back when it was just one thing. When it turned into two separate sides, that wasn't really as effective. We went through a lot of different versions of what if we did this before we ended up on this weird, I think it's called a tete beche.
Okay.
Like when you have a book on one side and you flip it over and there's a
right. Oh, that's too cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that incredible reading. I'm glad it kept going. So one of the first questions I always like to ask poets is, what poem or poet brought you to poetry?
Oh, yeah. So I actually came to poetry through rap music. So probably, it would have been early too, maybe Chuck D from Public Enemy or Rakim, somebody like that. That's a little bit simple. I wanted to be a rapper and I was bad at it. So then I found poetry, right? And it felt to me like it was much more intimately connected than people, at that time in the late 80s were giving it credit for. It's still a period of time when they were trying to act as if rap music wasn't really music, and that sort of argument was still going on. And so listening to the stories that Chuck D was talking about in this kind of like Black Power ethos, it made so much sense to me. And, all of that was instrumental in bringing me to poetry. But the first poet I just got knocked out by was Yusef Komunyakaa. And he was also the first poet I ever saw read. And so I was in Bloomington. So you mentioned I teach at IU. I went to Indiana as an undergraduate and then came back 25 years later as a professor. And so I saw Yusef read at this little coffee shop, and he was in a corner, and there were probably about 100 people jammed into this coffee shop to hear him read. I was like, I don't even know who this dude is. It doesn't mean anything to me. Why are so many people excited about him reading? And boy, it took about 12 seconds of him reading for me to understand. I didn't know any of his poems. He hadn't won the Pulitzer yet. Like, I didn't know anything about this person, but he just I mean, he burnt that place down. It was incredible. I never seen anything. I still haven't seen anything like that. I did a reading with him once, and seeing him up close was even more frightening. Because he was just, I mean, because I can tell this story. So this was right after The Devil's Garden came out. So it's that first, my first book. I'm a young dude. I'm all excited. Yusuf, I studied with Yusuf at Cave Canem, so I knew him. And I did a reading with Yusuf and Natasha Trethway. And so by that time, obviously, Yusuf had won the Pulitzer, and it was the year Natasha won it. And so she was reading from Native Guard. And I got up there and I read some of my poems, and I just put the whole thing into it, whole heart, like just let me burn this thing down like I saw Yusuf do back then. And no question. It was the best reading I'd ever given. I knew it. I could feel it. I was walking down the stairs, and Natasha was coming up the stairs to get on the stage, and she stopped and hugged me, and she whispered to me, "So it's going to be like that." And when she got up there, she just gave this just sizzling reading, just such an incredible thing from Native Guard, and none of us had heard any of that yet because she was still writing it. It was so good. And the whole time Yusuf was just kind of sitting there nodding and looking at us and nodding. And then he gets up and he looked at us and he said, "I'm just going to read 2 poems." And then he read 2 poems, and those 2 poems were probably they were better than anything that I've ever written.
Wow.
And it was like that moment where I was like, all right, he's so good at this. He's like, all right, I see you, young man. I see what you're doing, but I'm only gonna read 2 poems, and these 2 poems are gonna remind you of everything I've taught you. And it was a really beautiful and funny and humbling experience. The only problem is there were about 20 people in the room. Nobody saw this reading. The only person I've ever met outside of that time when I was there is a poet named Matthew Shinoda I ran into years later, and he told me he was there. But there was just nobody in this room.
Was it recorded?
Yes, but the person recording it didn't flip the tape. You had to flip the tape on there. The guy was so mesmerized by the reading, he forgot to flip the tape. And so only the first 15 minutes of the
I don't know, though. This kind of sounds like so much magic that it's even better just to talk about it rather than trying to experience it yourself.
Yeah. See, look who decided to join us. What's up, man?
Major, we're so glad you made it.
Yes, happy to be here. After 50 plus years on the East Coast time, I'm still trying to figure out how to manage account Central. So,
it is a hard switch.
Yeah.
We were just talking about what poem or poetry brought you to what poem or poet brought you to poetry, and Adrian was giving a wonderful story both about hip hop and Yusuf Kamanyaka and Natasha Trethewey thrown in there beautifully as well. And we've already introduced you to the group, Major, so perhaps I'll give you that question as well, and then maybe we can hear 2 poems from you. Would that be cool?
Sure.
If you feel set up.
Yeah, I feel like it's an origin story, I guess, that you can't overtell, but pretty much my grandparents who raised me had a collection of books in their house that was just random and everywhere. And there were 2 books of poetry in there, the selected poems of Langston Hughes and Robert Frost, a paperback edition of Robert Frost. And these were books that I returned to over and over again, both of them for their sense of voice. And in the instance of Langston Hughes, it was a portrait of a people that I kind of recognized growing up in Philadelphia. So 2 poems. Let's see. Are we tagging, Adrian? Would you read some as well?
No, I was reading while we were waiting for you. So they got a whole lot of me. They don't need to hear anything else from me.
Oh, okay. All right.
I almost thought about reading. I got the absurd man here. I was like, I wonder if I could try to read. And I thought, well, if he shows up, I wouldn't want to embarrass myself by trying to read some of these beautiful poems.
Okay. I will read two poems from The Absurd Man, which most of you know came out last year. This is a poem titled "My Children's Inheritance," and I like reading this poem just to remind them um, legacies um, go far more or beyond the material. My children's inheritance. A fancy for high green hills by a sea, baggy spaces in the day, a knack for gunpowder thinking, a library humming like a swarm of gnats, the intrigue of a woman with a pitch perfect mind, blinking eyes whose silence is ancient and naked, a grave which is not a grave, but a ruin to visit in middle age, a shiffer robe of half empty cologne bottles in various colors and dried flowers, more dignified in death, both evidence that I once cherished bouquets and timelessness. Bullet casings, a bowl of seashells, fine pins, one the Aurora Diamante with its two-toned rhodium plating that glitters when my right hand rages toward heaven. A love of big plates of pasta, Argentinian folk music, African rainforests, and the speeches of Lincoln that miss the pages of my books more than my doorways. A habit of dancing when the needle drops its existential beats. A disregard for the enemies of linnets and macaws, fears that match the haunted buttes out west, a hard desire for justice. The habit of lip biting when my trouble nears, the way my mouth opens like a flower, my quiver of arrows that outweighs the world, leaving the animals to bear witness. Memories of laughter that was bread and water, stylish hats, ways to time travel, the consequences of mistakes and second thoughts gummed to the future, a collection of radios, stacks of vinyls, the limitations of secrets, long nights that cascade like waterfalls, my madness, granular and complex, sealed like a footfall. Here is uh, a poem that puns on my name, and it's titled Double Major. And I think my friend Adrian might agree with me, and Siona might agree as well. When you sit down to write a poem in that Whitmanian sense, you're exploring so many parts of yourself are coming to the page. And in this instance, this is one of my cells kind of reporting on the self, a kind of duality of existence. Double major. I emerge whenever he confuses the lamp for a moon. It is then he thinks of fine bindings and ordered athenaeums. I own his face, but he washes and spends too little time behind his ears. He sees me in the mirror behind thick clouds of shaving cream, then suddenly believes in ghosts. His other cells are murals in the cave of his mind. They are speechless yet large. They steer his wishes like summer rain and amplify his terrors like newscasters. What he doesn't know, his dreams are his father's dreams, which are his grandfather's dreams, and so on. They possessed a single wish. He knocks repeatedly on the bolted door to his imagination. Tragically, he believes he can mend his wounds with his poetry, and thus I am his most loyal critic. He trots me out like a police dog. He calls out thirst for pads and pencils, destiny. Our voices come together like two wings of a butterfly. On occasion, he closes his eyes and sees me. I am negative capability, the test to all men are created equal. We are likely to dance at weddings against my will. He pulled out the same moves writing this poem, a smooth shimmy and a hop. This page is a kind of looking glass, making strange whatever stone carvings he installed along the narrow road to his interior. I suffer in silence, wedded to his convictions. He would like to tell you the truth about love, but we are going to bed, to bed.
Wow, thank you so much. It was worth the wait for sure. Thank you. Um, just incredible. So we do only have a few minutes left, so I do want to make sure we get to one of the viewers' questions. And I actually had some questions around the pandemic. Obviously, Adrian, you've produced a lot of work during the pandemic and about the pandemic. Major, I don't know if you got to also really thrive during the pandemic, but we do have a viewer that's asking about, what were maybe some of your biggest struggles during pandemic life? And then also, how do you think that COVID has changed our view of self-expression in art?
Major, you want to go ahead first? Because like I said, I was talking for a while. They've been hearing from me, but I'll follow up when you get to
my difficulty was so much of my art and being in the world, even though poetry is, as we popularly say, a solitary act, but it feeds on an engagement with the world around me. So to go into isolation, which is my beginning point, I don't like to stay there. That was the biggest challenge for me. I travel for 14, 15 years, once a week in the autumn to New York City, and I thrived on that engagement with strangers. Something about the pulse of a life. It's definitely something that that churns my spirit and powers of observation. And of course, there are so many heroes, writers and artists alike who I mourned their passing, former students as well. That was the difficulty. The reset button, however, sent me to the page, and I too wrote quite a bit, and wrote in community. That was one of the great powers that I hope, or benefits or silver linings, is that I'm in touch with people at the place where we first met, which was writing. So my weekly Zoom sessions are still going, and I'm Dee Dee will tell you I'm a Panglossian. Like, I can see a silver lining anywhere. So um, uh, I have great hope that the art, our relationship to the art has deepened. That's been probably what I most cherish.
That's beautifully said, man. Like I was thinking as you were talking about, re-engaging with that community. Patricia Smith's 65th birthday celebration, where with 65 poets read one poem over 2 days, was such an extraordinary and staggering event that wouldn't have been possible without this. Because nobody would have knew how to engage on Zoom before this, really. I mean, I guess a few of us use it to teach in class so we could get somebody in to talk to our students when we couldn't afford to bring them to campus, or we couldn't, arrange schedules or something, but never something to the scope of how about, and I think as Patricia described it, I'd love to have all my favorite poets be here, or as many of them as I can get on my birthday. We'll just drink wine and hang out and read poems. I thought, that is beautiful. It's just what a wonderful thing. I mean,
just saw each other right beforehand.
Yeah, right before that. Yes, right. Right. We were like in it. What's January 2020,
yeah,
and I think,
Springs.
Yeah, in Palm Springs, and then right after that, I think we went to Paris so I could work on the book, and that's when the country everything started to close down. So we were stuck over there for about a week, trying to come back in, which is not a bad place to be stuck. Nobody's gonna cry for me that I got to wander around Paris. Yeah, but I think the most difficult thing for me, initially anyway, was it took me a while to get my head around the gravity of it. And what I mean is, not just the danger that we were all facing, but the persistence of that danger and the fact that it was going to go on. I think a lot of people had the experience of that first week or so. I was so glad to be home. It's like, this is like a little vacation for a second, Got my DJ set out. We were eating like French fries for breakfast, having brunch every day. You know what I mean? And then like by day 5 or 6 or something, I was like, wait a minute, this is gonna stay. This is something that we can't sustain this anymore. So I think somewhere in the middle of all of it, I just kind of lost my perspective on myself, and I lost my perspective as it relates to my interactions with other people. And so it's taken quite a while for me to find my footing socially again. Even on phone calls with people I've known my whole life, I have a hard time because it wasn't them here. It was us, just like, it was us. It was just me. It's the cats. It's like the same group of entities, my plants that I was leaning into, trying to remind myself that there is actually this whole other world outside of it. Such a tough thing to do. So eventually that led me to writing the poems. And this book was supposed to be out next year. But after they saw it and what it was about, they're like, let's get it out now. So I was lucky to have them see it that way.
Well, that's incredible. Well, I'm glad that it was able to release early. We do have only actually just no seconds left, but I'll ask one more question before I get everyone off. So just 30-second answers. If you could, let our viewers know what is pushing you to the page right now. What is your source of inspiration? And then we'll close out our time together.
I am still feeling a sense of urgency owed to, always historical wrongs, but what we're doing to the planet right now, that urgency is calling me quite a bit. And I would say my poems are written out of deep, long questions, but also just out of a sense of play and joy and ecstasy. And I'm always excited to see where my mind and heart are going to take me. So I'm going to say me. I'm taking myself to the page.
That's right. I mean, it's like, if it's not us doing the moving, I mean, we talk about this all the time in class, that nobody can care about this stuff as much as we care about it. It's not possible. If you genuinely are committed to writing a poem, you got to love that poem more than anybody else could love it. Otherwise, it's somebody else's poem. You know what I mean? If they can love it more than you, then they can write it better than you. So, I'm trying to finish up this graphic novel. I mean, it is finished, but 7 years in, that's what drives me to the page. I want to be done with it. I am so tired of looking at it. But it's 330 pages long. You know what I mean? It's taken forever.
Wow.
And I wanted to just, so the urgency to get that thing finished, but also with the respect that the story deserves, and and to honor the lives that are being attended to inside of it. I'll just say this because I know we don't have any time. I thought, because I'm a comic book geek and I read a lot of graphic novels, I'd be able to bang out this script in a couple months and move on to the next project. 7 years. and it's finally going to be out of the world. So, like that, you know, it's that hubris as a writer, though.
I love that, though. I love it. Oh, man, I keep coming up with more questions. And now that we're talking about comic books, I'm like, what are your superpowers? But our time has come to a close. Thank you both so much for being able to share your time and your words. And, you know, for us to get a little bit of a teaser of your spirit on here, the Southern Festival of Books greatly appreciates it. And of course, to all the listeners and viewers, we thank you for attending and want to definitely make sure you get these books. So do click on the purchase links that are posted in the chat. And remember that the festival does continue online through October 10th. So please watch more of it. And thank you. What a great time. What a great time.
Thank you. It's so good to see you, brother. Always. And